But you take people and you expose them practically day and night to high intensity single wave radiation, and you're going to cause a destruction of the integrity of the water. And again, we are living water. And so it destructures the water, and then you become like a puddle, and the electricity can't move in a puddle, and then that's what we call sickness.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Dr. Tom, how are you, sir?
Okay, Ben, how you doing?
Great. Welcome back to the studio, back by popular demand here. So we had a lot of people request a part 2 with you, so we are doing that and kicking this off. So how was your Christmas? How was your New Year's?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Happy New Year to you, too.
Yeah, I pray it's your best year yet, my friend. But I've had a lot of questions and a lot of people, just request a part 2 with you because we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to hope to cover the grounds and ask you the right questions because I think you bring a lot of knowledge, and I love your perspective on why we're sick. You bring so much to the table, and it really, I just value your time, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time.
Okay.
So we will just dive right in here because we have a lot to cover. And the one thing I want to talk to you about is, my whole background has been in epigenetics. Like it's the, environment, and it's the genetic. So the phrase that we would say is that your level of health is the genetic expression of how we eat, move, think, pray, relate. I don't believe that we came from, I don't believe in the evolutionary type theory. I believe that there is genetic expression due to how, due to toxicity and allostatic load and all that. Now, you told me in the last interview, you believe genetics is like it's not there, or it's maybe, I think your phrase was actually, you called it BS. And I want to dive into that. I want to dive into your perspective on genetics, epigenetics, why we're sick, and just walk us through that.
So let me ask you some questions here to see if we're on the same page. They tell us that there is a string of nucleotides that are contained on these things called chromosomes in a long string, and they're divided up into segments that are called genes. Is that agreeable?
So part of me says yes, but there's also some, I would say, gray area there.
So, well, let's go on. So these genes, these sequences of nucleotides, they code for unique proteins. That's how the genome becomes expressed as reality. The phenotype, the genotype becomes the phenotype because it makes the genotype, the genes, the segments in the genome code for specific proteins. Is that right?
I would say mainstream
That's
believes.
what they say.
That's what the mainstream believes.
Yeah?
Yep.
So next question. They found about somewhere around 200,000 proteins, they say, in a human being.
They say, right. And okay.
And they say there's around 20,000 genes. So how does that work?
That is a great question, and I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
Neither do they. But what I say is apparently geneticists are not good at arithmetic because there's 180,000 proteins, according to their own science, so-called, that don't have a code, which is weird because where's the code for those? Now, here's the next thing. Can you show me a paper that proves that these sequence of nucleotides are translated and become a certain protein?
I've never seen one.
Yeah, I've looked. I've never found one either. The one I did find that allegedly proves it was the foundational work, started by saying, we're going to assume that these nucleotide sequences are coded into proteins. Wait a minute, this was the reference that was going to tell me how they knew that these sequences were coded into proteins. Now, next thing, have you ever seen a nucleotide? Has anybody seen a nucleotide?
I can't say yes.
I can say no. In which case, I went looking for how they proved that this nucleotide actually existed. And I can't go through that right now, but they basically took bat shit, and that they had certain chemical reactions in it, and that became guanine, the G. And it went on like that. And so here's the fundamental question. If I say to you, how do you know there's testosterone or any chemical, any vitamin A, nucleotide, testosterone in you right now? Can you just take it and do like electrophoresis and separate it out? The answer is no. You have to mix it. So you go to the foundational paper to show how they found testosterone, which is what I did. So they take a testicle, grind it up, put some buffers in it, put some acids in it, put some bases in it, centrifuge it, filter it, dehydrate it, and then put it on different chromatograph things. And then they get a band, and that band, they say, has a certain chemical in it. So I've asked now about 5 analytical chemists, right? These are people who study how you find stuff, chemical stuff. How do you know that mixing it with those acids and bases and with testosterone, they washed it with acetone 6 times? Because apparently when they washed it 5 times, they didn't get what they were looking for, which is also weird because I'm thinking, who's this guy in the lab who says, I know the previous guy, he washed it with acetone 5 times and he didn't get anything. So I know what the problem is. You got to wash it 6 times. Like, that's a weird way to think. Right. Anyways, that's what he did, and he got testosterone. So I asked the chemist, how do you know that all these things didn't make some chemical appear that wasn't actually there in your testicle? Right?
Right.
You know what the answer is?
No.
They have no idea. So I'm not saying there isn't a testosterone, although I don't think there is, but I'm saying that the way that they claim to have found it, which is not like if I say there's a corkscrew in my utensil drawer, what I do is I go to the utensil drawer, open it up, I look for something that meets the definition of a corkscrew, I take it out, I've now isolated the corkscrew without adding anything to it that would have confounded the information.
Right.
And then I can analyze the corkscrew and find out what it's made of, and B, find out what it does. Like it pulls things out, corks out of bottles. But if you've never done that step, which they say they've never done that for viruses, they've never done it for nucleotides, they've never done it for genes, then on what basis are you claiming that A, these things exist, and B, do what you say they do?
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do-no-harm approach. At Ezra Healing, Your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
And my answer would be, it's just a made-up story.
I mean, it's interesting because, you have people that are on like TRT or and they respond, and, you see like lab work and they can seem to be measuring testosterone. So how would they measure that on lab work?
So number one, I didn't say that chemicals don't have effects, right? Like you give somebody who's sad, you can give them some cocaine and they don't feel sad anymore. Ben, that's because if the reason people are sad is because they have a cocaine deficiency.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Does that prove that you have cocaine in you when you're normal?
Right. Right. I see your point.
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense.
So they take those steps, they get a chemical, and then the test sort of recreates the steps, and then they assay for the chemical. Now, I'm not even saying that there isn't maybe some value in that test, because it's measuring something which has something to do with with God knows what. But that does not prove that we have testosterone in our testicles. And the problem with doing that is, and I would go so far as to every single time you make that mistake, not you, but one does, and says, oh, testosterone does this in men. And so I give them chemical testosterone, and you will see some effect, and it will always have a negative effect. Always. Now, it may have some positive effects, like you get more libido or you get stronger, and then your testicles shrink, right? And then you're eventually worse off than you ever were, because if you ever stop the testosterone, now you even have less ability, less strong muscles, less libido, less resilience. Everything is worse. And so now you're an addict to a chemical. And that happens not sometimes, it happens every single time. And that's the repercussion of thinking we're basically made of chemicals. We're not.
Right. I would agree with that.
And in fact, like Carrie Mullis said, you got to realize molecules are hypothetical. Nobody has seen an atom. Nobody, in fact, one of the leaders of atomic theory, a guy named Schrodinger, you may have heard of him, he said, if you looked at an atom, you'd never see an electron. That is a hypothetical construct, which is how we do science.
Right.
We don't observe nature. We don't do experiments that would confirm observations or show us reality. We make models and then try to confirm the models.
So you're saying we should use observational, right?
Yes.
I mean, I agree.
What happens if I eat a tomato? I feel sick.
Yeah.
Therefore, I don't eat tomatoes.
Right. We want a real hard objective findings. And I feel like,
based on your senses.
Yes.
That's all you have.
And, I say it all the time. I teach my kids that we homeschool my 5 children, and I always tell them that science is observational, and
experiments.
And experimental. Yes.
But experiments are intuitive, because if you want to know if a hammer knocks in a nail, you take only a hammer, hit the nail, and see if it goes in. And then you go like this with your arm without the hammer. It doesn't go in.
Right.
And now you know that you've done an actual valid science experiment. And so do that with a nucleotide.
Right.
Do it with a virus. Do it with a prion. And so all this stuff with epigenetics, all you're seeing is, well, if I exercise and move my body, I get stronger. why do you have to say it's because this gene codes for muscle integrity? You don't know that. It's not observation. That's somebody made up a theory. And I would forget about that whole thing and stick with, when I eat better food and breathe clean air and, pray and do these things, my life is better.
Right.
Good.
Right. So I love this simplified. I believe in simplified means to remove the unnecessary. I mean, what I want to do is I want to know the objective truth here, and that's what I'm searching for. And I believe you bring a lot of wisdom to that area. And I feel like even just the deeper I go down this, even with the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR test, it's, if people were to know what we're talking about and how much corruption is around that and what they use to diagnose all these, like even measles, they use the PCR test. COVID-19, they use this. And they have a different spin cycle rate. And what are they testing for? So what you're measuring, because they claim, I mean, in order for this test to be active, correct me if I'm wrong, they have to get so-called DNA to activate this test or some kind of material, right?
So they claim that they have this chemical that's in us called DNA. By the way, one of the foundational claims of DNA is that it's a double helix, right? Absolutely foundational to the whole theory. And so here's a question for you. Do you know who came up with this idea that DNA is a double helix?
I've heard this name, but I don't recall it.
Watson and Crick.
Okay.
Got a Nobel Prize for it. So I asked doctors, do you ever read the Watson and Crick paper in Nature 1953 that proposed this? No. So I read it. There's not a measurement in the whole paper. They say, and I can read it to you because I have it on my desk, we assumed a rotational angle of 10 angstroms, which is the definition of a double helix or a spiral, which means they made it up.
Yeah.
It's like saying, let's assume we have a figure that has 90-degree angles like this. Oh my God, I found a box. No, you didn't find a box. You made it up in your mind that this is a box. You came up with the definition of a box, and then you said you found it. So they have this hypothetical molecule, which is in hypothetical viruses. But when you're talking about the PCR, just ask a simple question. Can you ever claim that a piece of something, a part of something, came from something if you don't have the pure form of the something first?
Right.
Like if I said, Ben, I got this toenail, I found it in the woods, and it comes from an invisible unicorn. You might ask me, Tom, did you see the unicorn? No. And then you might say, how do you know it's from a unicorn? And how do you know it's not from a jackal or a rabbit or something? So because they say, this is their words, we've never had a pure measles virus. Nobody has ever had that. We don't know. We've only had it claiming to have it mixed with the culture or human cells. Therefore, how do you know that this chemical came from the virus and not the culture or the human cells? The answer is you don't. So you're testing something of which you have no idea the origin of this something. And it could be that if you're sick, you break down and you make more pieces of chemicals, and then that's what they're testing for. So the test has no relevance, it has nothing to do with cycles. All that's just this sort of health freedom nonsense of people who don't understand the foundational science, who say, oh, if we did it right, we'd get a good result. No, you wouldn't, because how can you validate this test when you don't know where the origin of this material came from.
Exactly right. So why are they using this PCR test as much as they are in clinical settings?
Because it's a scam. And it wouldn't work. The scam wouldn't work unless they had a test to do the scam for.
Exactly right.
And then people would say, wait a minute, you're just guessing here.
And Tom,
so they make up a test that is a obvious scam. And if you ask them, Christine Massey asked 200 different institutions, can you show me a photograph of a pure virus? Can you prove that you have the pure virus so that you could make sure that the DNA or the RNA came from that virus? They all say that is not within the scope of virology. Now, here's another thing. They say it came from a person, right? They tell you because they've never sequenced the DNA of a human either. They do the same thing. They chop it up into little pieces, and then they stitch it together, called alignment. And then they say 10 to 20% is missing. Now, how do you know that 10 to 20% is missing if you've never had the whole thing in the first place? How do you know 80% isn't missing or 2%? You have no idea.
Right.
If I say, here's a rope, and here's a piece of a rope, and I think it's only 20% of the rope, you would expect that I would have had the rope first. They don't have the human sequence first. And if they say if there's 10% missing, how do they know that 10% that they're testing for in a PCR isn't the part that's missing?
Right.
This is logical nonsense.
I would have to agree with that. And that's one thing I argued, Tom, during COVID, is when I've never heard of the PCR test prior to COVID. I started looking into it. I've listened to Kerry Mullis talk about the inventor of the PCR, and he even said exactly, almost word for word, what you said there. They take something and, turn it out of something, and, it doesn't tell whether you're sick or not. But they're using it for all these different diseases, HIV. I mean, half the diseases that they have vaccines for, coincidentally, they use this PCR test. And it makes you wonder. And I think people need to understand that there's a lot of corruption. In a clinical setting, as you know, doctors fill out a SOAP note, subjective, objective. And I argued the fact that the PCR has no clinical merit because how many people tested positive are false positive?
There is no false positive.
But according to the PCR, right?
No, according to what they say. But how do they know that how do you know you have measles or not?
Right. I mean, you'd have an objective finding.
No. What is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know.
Right. The CDC says, you go look up on their website, there is no clinical sign or symptom that defines measles. Now, already that means before these tests, nobody knew who had measles and who didn't, right? Because that's what they said. Sometimes they say, well, Koplik spots, white spots inside the cheek, that defines measles. Last year, there was a study from Japan. They did, on their terms, virus studies on children with Koplik spots. 23% had the measles virus, 21% had German measles virus. The others had all different kinds of viruses. So they proved on their terms that there is no sign or symptom that says whether anybody had measles. In fact, what it tells you is measles is not a disease. It's just a rash that nobody can tell whether it's this one or that one because they're made up entities. The problem is not corruption, Ben. The problem is, and this unfortunately includes both sides, and I mean the so-called pro-vaccine side and the so-called anti-vaccine side, except some of us. They are scientifically illiterate. They don't know how to ask the question, a PCR test, what is it? Where's the origin of this sequence? So they go down this, should we give the Hep B, it's transmissible at day 0, day 60, whatever. It's nonsense. There is no Hep B virus. And once you see that, by asking the right questions, this whole argument is done.
Right.
There's no reason for any of these interventions.
And Dr. Tom, that's why I'm sitting down with you. I feel like we need to get this information out to the masses. And I think it's important that people hear this because, the more I search this, the more I look into this, the more I'm uncovering, the more I'm discovering, the more I'm learning, and I think that's, we literally have to unlearn what we've been learned or what we learned. And I think I can't help think of the quote by Mark Twain. He says, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you believe to be true that just ain't so, and there's so many people like that. And, some of this stuff I do believe, or I have thought, but this is why I want to sit down with you. I want to learn from you. And I want to know, because I believe what you're saying there's merit to it, and I believe there's truth to it. And I believe what you're saying. And so, hepatitis B, all this stuff, it is, there is corruption, but there is also, I think, like you said, there's just a lack of true science in this, and I feel like this has spilled over into our public school systems. This has spilled over into, being funneled into the masses. And this is why we choose to homeschool, to really educate our children on true science and the truth and true health.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a scientifically illiterate culture, and this has been going on. I can go into the history of it, but this has been going on for at least 120 years. And it was deliberate because it's a much easier way to control people rather than like guns and starve them and stuff, then they get pissed off. But if you get them to think in a certain way, and this is really important, Ben, and this is where I think you could play a role in this. They always set up two sides, right? So there's the pro-vaccine side and the anti-vaccine side, but they believe the same thing. And when you have a chance to get some of these prominent so-called anti-vax people who say they're pro-vaccine, but want safer vaccines and all this, I mean, you need to ask them, how do you know there's a virus? How do you know measles is a specific disease?
Right.
Because they don't know.
They don't know.
And that's the scary part, because the people who are of goodwill and looking for the truth, like you and a whole lot of your followers, they're being misled by the so-called alternative to the normal narrative. And that's a huge problem as far as I'm concerned. And in a way, that's why I'm doing this. I'm happy to be wrong, but I want to see what the evidence is. Where is the logic and the science of saying that measles is a specific entity?
Right.
I need to see that paper. I need to hear the logic before I will accept it, because I don't buy it.
Well, I mean, even the Bible says truth is a narrow path, and and I feel like we live in so much deception, and there is, and I just see it. And so you're not going to hear the truth in the mainstream. You're not going to see that. So this is why I believe you, Dr. Tom, and I want to learn from you and what you're saying, because I have experienced massive censorship, and and they came after me in a big way during COVID, just because I was speaking the truth in certain areas, and the government didn't like that. I mean, so getting this information out, this is a huge pill to swallow. And, I would hear guys talk about there are no viruses. And, before I started hearing this, and I understood, viruses, the word virus is toxin or poison in the root meaning. It's not this boogie, airborne boogeyman that lives outside the body. I don't believe in that. But I did, how do I say it? I had to change my thinking around this whole topic. And I think that's the beauty of true science and learning is to be able to change our minds and understand it's come from a place of humility that we don't have all the answers, that the science is not settled. And I love that you said, okay, I haven't seen anything objectively that's sound science that convinces me otherwise. And to me, that is a statement from someone that is seeking the truth, seeking the answers here. And so what, in your opinion, what is it going to take for this information to get out?
It's going to take, the next time Del Bigtree comes on your show, you're going to say, Del, we need to start at the beginning.
Beautiful.
Tell me how you know. You've been talking about engineered viruses for 5 years now. Tell me the evidence that there is a virus. How does a virologist prove the existence of a virus and show that it causes disease? And we're not going to the next step until you do that. Now, he may quit and say, screw you, I'm out of here. But in your position, you can. I can't talk to these people. They won't talk to me. So you can do that, and maybe they know. I'm fine if they say, "Here, we took somebody who's sick. We did a centrifugation, had pure particle. We examined it. We got the chemistry of it. We got the DNA or the RNA. We sequenced it. We showed that particle causes disease when exposed to healthy people in the normal way or animals, right? And then we could purify the virus out of those people. That's simple logic, right? That's how you would say, I think there's arsenic in your blood that's making you sick. You find the arsenic, you purify it. You don't like inject blood in them, right? Because who knows what else is in there. You inject the arsenic and see if that's the agent. That's all I'm asking for.
Mm.
And I happen to know that doesn't exist. We've got 20 really smart people looking for that paper. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for how do you know that DNA is the code of life? You know, I had a woman came to me, DNA is the code of life. Woman comes to me, when she was like a month or so pregnant, she had a horrible accident, cut off the last 4 fingers of her hand like in a bandsaw. Her child was born without those 4 fingers on her hand, same hand. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't square with what I learned about genetics. There's something really mysterious happening that's called life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best place it's described is probably the Bible. But there is a creator who works in ways which we're not really clear about, that created life out of whatever, clay, I guess. And to have the arrogance to think that we know how that works,
Amen.
To me, that's a big part of the problem.
I totally agree with you, Dr. Tom.
All right, so you have a bunch of other questions. I don't want to just keep going on.
I feel convicted because you just plugged Del Bigtree. I'm actually going on his show, God willing, at the end of the month. So
there you go. And if you need help with figuring out what to ask him, but it's simple. Like, just think, how would you find a corkscrew? And show that a corkscrew is made of whatever. You don't take a utensil drawer, grind the whole thing up, and then dump it in an analytical thing and see what it's made of.
Right.
You don't know whether it's the plastic spoon.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
Well, Dr. Tom, I'm going to reach out to you, and I think I need to have some more conversations with you to really be articulate in this area, because this is changing a lot of the ways I've been taught. And just with I knew that viruses don't exist. I mean, I shouldn't say that always, but COVID opened my eyes to that. COVID created me to search and to find and really uproot a lot of my belief systems in virology. And I realized that this whole
science,
everything in science, and I've always said science is observational. We need objective data, and there's so much that it's not objective. It's theoretical. This is why I think they have like that bumper sticker slogan, "I believe in science." I mean, that's kind of like saying I believe in, it's like I believe in Jesus. Is this a religion to you? I mean, this is.
Let me read you something from a guy who really started this, named Albert Einstein. Supposedly the smartest guy in the 20th century. Here's a quote from The Structure of Scientific Thought. The axiomatic basis of theoretical physics, so that's like the mother of all sciences, cannot be an influence from experience, but must be free invention. I don't know if it's a family show, but I interpret that as saying it's not based on what you see or observe, it's making shit up.
Mm.
And from then on, that became the basis of science. We make stuff up. We make up genomes and evolution, get rid of, the creator part, right? Even though there's no evidence of any transitional species of anything ever. So there's no observation that's based on. And by the way, if you take like a fruit fly and you try to so-called mutate it, you can go so far and then it either dies or bizarrely reverts back to its original form. Now, here's an interesting correlation with the Bible, because allegedly it's, all the species were created unique and, intact and not to be mixed with the other ones, right? That's what it says. That's what the scientific experimentation shows. You cannot make a fruit fly into a butterfly. You can't make a monkey into a person. You can't make they say whales came from bears. Somehow the bear jumped in the water and then it grew a spout to breathe. I mean, this is nonsense.
I want to ask you then, what, in your opinion, we're going to shift gears. Why do we get sick?
We get sick for 4 reasons. 1, injuries. Like you fall off a horse, right? Break your leg. That's a sickness. Number 2, you're starving. That could be for good food. It could be for shelter. Could be from warmth. Could be from clean water. Could be from emotional support. It could be starving for the truth. Lots of things are starving people. So that's number 2. Number 3, you're poisoned. Vaccines, number 1, they're all poison. Then there's pharmaceuticals, that's number 2, they're all poison. Then there's supplements, like chemical supplements like vitamin A and all the rest of it. Those are chemical poisons. And then there's glyphosate and, wireless stuff and you name it. I don't want to downplay those, but, arsenic, and we got lots of aluminum injected into you. Cell cultures injected into people, that's vaccines. So there's lots of creative ways of poisoning people. And number 4, which is the biggest in my opinion, is you're delusional. You think there's a virus. You think that there's this invisible thing out to get you. And I just imagine like my cat Pumpkin. He can't live if he can't trust his experience of the world. And what would happen is if you could convince him there was something that's going to get him that he doesn't know, he'd go and hide under the bed. Because how does he know? You say pumpkin. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't sense it. And then he would stop eating because he's worried if he comes out. And his cat friends would say, yeah, see, the thing got you. That's Americans. You know, I had this guy I knew who's an anthroposophical doctor who believed in viruses, treated people with AIDS with HIV drugs. And this is the power of conception and belief. And so when COVID hits, because there's a virus that's going to get him, he gets the shots. Third shot, next day he's dead in his bed from a stroke. Now you could say what killed him was the shot, but really what killed him was the belief in viruses. Because then he did the normal thing, which is try to protect himself by injecting himself with poison, and that killed him. And, you know, this power is so strong. They've done studies, you know, you take chemo, you lose your hair and you get sick and all that. They give cancer patients saline, tell them it's chemo, and they lose their hair. So if you're going to walk around thinking there's genetics, epigenetics, evolution, viruses, prions, you know, you're going to take actions which are wonky.
Right.
That's a scientific word meaning stupid.
Right. Well, you know, I think you're right, and I believe that the power of the mind is a very powerful thing. I mean, we live our life through the nervous system, and you know, every thought changes our physiology. And you know, there's a saying out there, you know, whatever we believe, whatever the mind conceives and believes, it'll achieve. You know, and I think that's it's an interesting take, and I think that there's truth to that. You know, now I've also heard theories of, too, just the amount of radiation exposure from, you know, radio lines, and I know that you've maybe touched on that and maybe wrote a book on that. Can you give us some thoughts on that during, you know, the so-called Spanish flu, the implementation of the radio lines?
I mean, look, we live in a system of that, you know, I can't prove this, but I think it's created for the well-being of all creatures, including human beings, men and women. And that system is, you know, there's stars and there's the sun and the moon and there's the earth and there's the ether, which is the medium that we live in. And we swim in this electromagnetic world. And it's basically organized in such a way to create health and well-being for all of us. And what it isn't is single high frequency beams that are needed to, say, run your cell phone. You can't have just sunlight because then your cell phone doesn't work. You can't run your computer on the Schumann resonance from the earth, which is our home, because it doesn't work. So they take certain frequencies and make them really intense. Now, to a certain extent, you can do that, you know, and make radio waves and make lights. And, you know, on certain low levels, that doesn't interfere, or it interferes not enough so we can't cope. As long as we're still connected to the sun and the earth and good food and loving plants and animals and running around outside like your children do and playing in the sunshine and all the rest of it, right? They do that, and that mitigates the effect. But you take people and you expose them practically day and night to high intensity single wave radiation, and you're going to cause a destruction of the integrity of the water. And again, we are living water.
Right.
And so it destructures the water, and then you become like a puddle, and the electricity can't move in a puddle, and then that's what we call sickness.
I just can't help, a mile down the road from me, there's a giant water tower with about 7 5G towers on top of the water tower. I mean, what is that doing to the population here? You know, it's making them sick.
Good, I can tell you that.
Bad
Right, and you can prove that you can take water that's, you can watch how water moves because it's organized in a certain way, not life, but close, with living with proteins, and then you put it in the sun and you put it on the earth and the water starts flowing because it's charged, which is what we are. We're charged water. And then you put your cell phone next to the beaker and it stops being able to flow because it disorganizes the water.
My goodness.
So if you have swelling in your knee, because they say it's arthritis, but what you have is disorganized water.
That is so that's fascinating. So tell me, so how do we, let's say I have inflammation in my knee due to this cluster and chaos in the body and disruption of flow. How do I restore that flow of water in the body?
It's the same, why do you have heart failure? Because the water doesn't move up the veins. How does the water move up the veins? Because it carries an electrical charge, which creates movement of water in tubes, which you can absolutely prove with simple experiments. And then you can show that if you're exposed to the sun and standing on the earth, which is, the normal condition of all living things, that increases the flow of the water or increases the organization of the water in your knee. So if you have disorganized water in your knee or heart failure, or the water isn't flowing right in your body, which is basically, in a way, the root cause of illness, then you need to at least get out in the sun, get rid of your wireless devices, ground to the earth, start eating food that comes from the earth, and start thinking about what kind of poisons you're putting in your body that are disorganizing your water. And, we have experiments now where you take water and you expose it to certain emotions, or even put love on the bottle, and that organizes the water into a certain crystalline form. And then you put hate, or you think hatred, and it disorganizes. So we have this water in us, which is the same organization. So, and again, you can find correlations with the Bible with this. What you think and what you believe determines the outcome of your life. That is not a new concept.
Right.
How you see the world. Now, but, there's earth, there's grounding to the earth, there's being in the sun, there's stop taking pharmaceuticals, which all further poison you. There's healthy movement, right? There's eating good food. There's getting rid of poisons, which are affecting the ability to organize the water. There's getting rid of wireless device. There's all kinds of things. This is what we do at our New Biology Clinic. We go through what happened to you. We have these 6 doctors, like reformed doctors, and we take your story, and say, well, this is what's missing in your life.
And what's the name of the clinic, Doc?
It's the New Biology Clinic. It's
right.
Part of the drtomcowan.com, what do you call it, ecosystem.
So Doc, I know we're wrapping up on the hour here. I'm just fascinated about the water topic, and I know we're gonna get a lot of questions about that. I mean, so I always buy the mountains, the Mountain Valley. Shout out to Mountain Valley. They don't sponsor this podcast or anything, but I always buy the spring water from them. So in your opinion, is spring water the healthiest water to drink?
It's a little more complicated than that, because Mountain Valley, as far as bottled water, is probably okay. But, I don't know if you would agree with this, but water needs to be moving. Like, animals don't drink stagnant water, right? That's like, because there's something wrong there. So what I would suggest, if people can, all over the place, there's water that emerges from the earth of its own accord. That's different than a well. where, right, water's down below, you have to get it up and pump it up. But, a few miles from us, there's a water that spouts out of the earth of its own accord. That is the water that we should be drinking. It's called primary water, and it's basically uncontaminated. Now, I think Mountain Valley probably does something like that. That's my guess. But for me, then, if you're going to store it or keep it still for a while, like in a bottle, you have to then get it moving again by putting it into a vortex and essentially recreating, the creation uses vortices to create life. How do I know that? Just look at any plant, sunflower, look at the top of your head, there's a vortex. The way the heart moves, it creates a vortex of the blood inside the heart. The way that we move and the way the bones are organized, they're all in vortices. The vortex motion is how to take the non-living and bring it up into the living world. So before I drink any water, I have this, either I stir it and create a vortex by stirring it, or I have this vortexing device and I make it's magnetic, and it essentially creates a charge in the water. So if I'm going to drink water in a bottle, I put it in, in something, and I create the vortex, get it moving again. That creates a charge, and that makes it easier for you to organize the water yourself.
Fantastic. Gives me an idea of creating a new water bottle. Well, Dr. Tom, I appreciate your time. I feel like, goodness, this 50 minutes flew by pretty fast. And I just thank you for all your wisdom you bring to the table and your willingness to sit down with me again and being generous of your time on a Friday afternoon. I want to give you the last word here, just where people can find you. And again, put a plug in for your site, your clinic, and just give the last word of encouragement.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you doing this, Ben. And I really, it's not going to be enough for me and the Baileys and, because it's easy to just say, shut these people up. But when you have the access to people, we need you to understand how to ask those questions. And it's not hard. This is not like some complicated mess here, because then the people can hear it. And I have the hope, I guess, or the belief maybe, that when people hear this simple truth, that connects with the way they actually see life. Like, this is how a plumber works on life, right? They use their observation and see what's there, and then they do experiments to see what's work, and how, carpenters make stuff. They don't use theories. Once we do that, I think that we can really progress this. So people can we have 3 sites. We have a food business that sells the best quality food. We curate foods like ghee and vegetable powders and sauerkraut and stuff like that. That's Dr. Cowan's Garden. We have a site that's more about medicines, the medicines that I used in my practice and we use at the clinic. That's drtomcowan.com. And then that leads into the New Biology Clinic, which is our online clinic, where if you want to be treated with somebody who's not going to treat you with theories about you have such and such a disease and that means this, but actually what happened to you, who are you, how do you think, how do you eat, how do you move, how do you live your life, what can we do to work with that so that your life is better? I mean, it sounds so simple, and it is. And of course, there's details that are complicated, but that's what we're doing. That's the newbiologyclinic.com.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Tom, I appreciate your time. Go to his site, go support him. And I, again, keep digging, always searching for answers, because the science is not settled. and the truth is a narrow path. Again, if you have a condition or a so-called diagnosis, reach out to Dr. Tom. I know he's helping and saving lives and serving a lot of people in his clinics. And Dr. Tom, thank you again.
All right, Ben, thanks for talking with me today.
Yes.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be, right, to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?